Libby Squire was a bright, independent young woman whose life reflected the hopes and ambitions of many students living abroad. She was born in the United Kingdom and grew up in a close-knit family that encouraged curiosity, education, and independence. From an early age, Libby showed intelligence and determination. She was known among friends and family as kind, thoughtful, and quietly confident. When she later moved to pursue her studies, she carried with her not only academic goals, but also the belief that the world was largely safe if you were careful and honest. Libby enrolled at the University of Hull in England, where she studied philosophy. She was passionate about ideas, ethics, and understanding how people think and behave. Those who knew her described her as reflective, gentle, and friendly. She enjoyed conversations that went deep, nights out with friends, and the sense of freedom that came with being a university student in a new city. Hull, like many student towns, felt familiar and manageable. It was a place where students walked home late at night, trusted their surroundings, and believed danger was something distant that happened to others. On the night her story began to change forever, Libby went out with friends to socialize, like countless students do every weekend. There was nothing unusual about the evening. She visited bars, talked, laughed, and moved between locations with people she trusted. At some point during the night, circumstances shifted. Libby became separated from her friends. Accounts later showed that she was vulnerable, alone, and disoriented. Still, she tried to make her way home, relying on instinct and the assumption that she could safely reach familiar streets. CCTV footage would later become one of the most important pieces of the case. Cameras captured Libby walking through the city alone, heading toward her neighborhood. These images are haunting in hindsight. A young woman moving through quiet streets, unaware that she was being watched, unaware that her life was about to end. The footage showed her encountering a man driving a vehicle. What happened in the moments that followed would remain unclear for some time, but that brief interaction marked the last known sighting of Libby alive.
When Libby did not return home, concern quickly grew. Her housemates noticed her absence and raised the alarm. At first, there was confusion rather than panic. Friends assumed she might have stayed elsewhere or lost her phone. But as hours turned into a full day, with no contact, worry hardened into fear. Her family was informed, and police were contacted. What began as a missing person case soon became a large-scale investigation. The search for Libby was immediate and intense. Police officers, volunteers, and local residents came together, combing streets, parks, waterways, and abandoned areas. The River Hull and nearby pots became a central focus. Posters with Libby's face spread across the city and beyond. Social media amplified the search, with strangers sharing her photo, hoping someone had seen her or knew something that could help. For many, her face became a symbol of vulnerability and urgency. As days passed without answers, the atmosphere changed. Hope battled with dread. Every possible lead was investigated, every sighting reported. Police reviewed hours of CCTV footage, tracing Libby's movements step by step. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form of her final hours. The investigation identified a suspect based on vehicle tracking and surveillance footage. A man was arrested, bringing a momentary surge of hope that the truth might finally emerge. Then came the discovery that shattered all remaining optimism. Libby's body was found in the Humber estuary, weeks after she had gone missing. The news devastated her family, friends, and the wider public. What had started as a search for a missing student ended as a homicide investigation. The reality was painful and final. Libby was gone. The impact of her death rippled far beyond Hull. Students across the UK saw themselves in her story. Parents questioned safety. Communities asked hard questions about how such a crime could happen and whether more could have been done. Libby was no longer just a philosophy student or a missing person. She became a symbol of the dangers women face, even in places they consider familiar. As the investigation continued, attention turned toward accountability and justice. Evidence was gathered, timelines were built, and the legal process began to take shape. For Libby's family, grief mixed with a relentless need for answers. They wanted the truth, not only for themselves but to ensure that what happened to Libby would not be forgotten or dismissed. Her story, even at this early stage, was no longer only about one night or one city. It was about trust, vulnerability, and the harsh reality that a single moment can change everything. Libby Squire's life mattered, and the fight for justice had only just begun. As the investigation deepened, the focus shifted from searching to understanding exactly what had happened in Libby's final hours. Police began piecing together a detailed timeline using CCTV footage, mobile phone data, and witness statements. Every movement Libby made that night was examined carefully. The streets she walked, the moments she paused, and the people she encountered were all reconstructed to uncover the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. One of the most critical breakthroughs came from extensive CCTV analysis. Investigators identified a vehicle that appeared multiple times near Libby during her walk home. The driver's behavior raised suspicions. This was not a random passing car. It lingered, circled, and reappeared in areas where Libby had been seen. Using vehicle registration data, police traced the car back to a man named Pavel Relevich, a butcher living in Hull. His arrest marked a turning point in the case. Relevich initially denied involvement, but evidence continued to mount. Investigators searched his home, car, and workplace, uncovering disturbing details. Forensic teams found fibers, digital evidence, and patterns that contradicted his statements. Meanwhile, experts analyzed Libby's phone data, which showed sudden disconnection during the time she was last seen. The silence of her phone echoed the silence she could no longer break. As the case moved forward, prosecutors built a narrative supported by both circumstantial and forensic evidence. They argued that Libby had been abducted, assaulted, and murdered. While the exact sequence of events remained complex, the overarching truth became increasingly clear. This was not an accident, nor was it a case of misadventure. It was a violent crime committed against a vulnerable young woman. The trial brought Libby's story into the public eye once again. Courtrooms filled with journalists, legal experts, and members of the public who had followed the case from the beginning. Libby's family sat through painful testimonies, hearing intimate and distressing details about her final moments. For them, justice came at a heavy emotional cost. Each fact presented in court reopened wounds that would never fully heal. Prosecutors relied heavily on scientific evidence. DNA analysis, fiber transfers, and digital tracking formed the backbone of the case. Experts explained how minute traces can tell powerful stories, how contact leaves behind evidence even when words are silenced. This scientific precision became Libby's voice, speaking on her behalf when she no longer could. The defense attempted to cast doubt, suggesting alternative explanations and inconsistencies. However, the cumulative weight of evidence proved overwhelming. Witnesses described Relevich's movements and behavior that night. Data placed him in locations he claimed never to have visited. Slowly but decisively, the case moved toward a verdict. When the jury delivered its decision, it confirmed what many had feared and hoped for simultaneously. Pavel Relevich was found guilty of Libby Squire's rape and murder. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. For Libby's family, it was not closure, but it was accountability. Justice, though delayed, had been served. The sentencing phase brought another wave of emotion. Relevich received a life sentence with a minimum term, ensuring he would spend decades behind bars. The judge spoke of the severity of the crime and the lasting damage inflicted on Libby's loved ones. Libby was described not as a statistic, but as a person whose life had value, dreams, and meaning. Outside the courtroom, the case sparked national conversation. Questions were raised about women's safety, nightlife culture, and how society responds to vulnerability. Universities reviewed safety measures. Communities discussed responsibility, awareness, and prevention. Libby's death forced many to confront uncomfortable truths about how easily danger can hide behind ordinary appearances. Her family, despite their grief, showed remarkable strength. They spoke publicly about Libby, honoring her intelligence, kindness, and love for life. They made it clear that she should be remembered for who she was, not only for how she died. In doing so, they reclaimed her story from the crime that tried to define it. By this stage, Libby's case was no longer just a local tragedy. It became a symbol of justice achieved through persistence, science, and collective effort. Yet even with the conviction secured, the pain remained. Justice does not erase loss. It only acknowledges it. The story was moving toward its final chapter, not in resolution of grief, but in legacy. What Libby's case would mean for the future, how it would shape awareness, policy, and memory was still unfolding.
In the years following the conviction, Libby Squire's story continued to resonate far beyond the courtroom. While the legal process had reached its conclusion, the emotional and social impact of her case was still unfolding. For Libby's family, life after the trial was marked by an absence that could never be filled. Justice had been delivered in a legal sense, but the reality of losing a daughter, a sister, and a friend remained a daily struggle. Their grief became quieter with time, but it never disappeared. Libby's parents chose to honor her memory not through silence, but through purpose. They spoke openly about who Libby was before the tragedy, her love for learning, her gentle humor, and her compassion for others. They emphasized that Libby was not defined by the crime committed against her. She was a philosophy student with dreams, a young woman exploring independence, and a person whose life mattered deeply. By sharing her story, they aimed to shift the focus from fear to awareness and from tragedy to change. Universities and local authorities across the UK took note of the case. Discussions about student safety, late-night transport, and awareness campaigns became more prominent. While no system can guarantee complete safety, Libby's case prompted institutions to reevaluate how they support students, especially those living away from home for the first time. Safety measures, educational programs, and conversations about looking out for one another gained renewed urgency. The broader public conversation was equally significant. Libby's story highlighted the vulnerability many women face in everyday situations: walking home, trusting strangers, assuming familiarity equals safety. Her case became part of a larger dialogue about violence against women and the responsibilities of society to address it. Candlelight vigils, memorials, and online tributes showed that Libby's life had touched people who never met her but felt connected to her story. Media coverage gradually shifted from the details of the crime to its consequences. Commentators discussed how forensic science played a crucial role in achieving justice. The careful use of CCTV, DNA evidence, and digital tracking demonstrated how modern investigative tools can give victims a voice long after they have been silenced. Libby's case became an example of how persistence and technology can uncover the truth, even when time has passed. Despite the public attention, Libby's family continued to ask for respect and sensitivity. They reminded people that behind every headline is a real person and a grieving family. Their strength lay not in forgetting, but in remembering Libby as she lived curious, thoughtful, and full of potential. They encouraged others to speak openly about safety, consent, and responsibility, hoping that awareness could prevent future tragedies. Libby's legacy also lived on through the impact she had on those closest to her. Friends describe how she challenged them intellectually, listened without judgment, and offered kindness in quiet ways. Her absence reshaped their lives, but her influence remained. In remembering her, they found motivation to support one another and to stay vigilant in a world that can be unpredictable. Over time, Libby Squire's name came to represent more than a crime. It became a reminder of the importance of accountability and the power of collective action. When communities work together, sharing information, supporting investigations, and refusing to let victims be forgotten, justice becomes possible, even in the darkest circumstances. Her story also served as a warning without being defined by fear. It urged people to be aware, to look out for one another, and to question assumptions about safety. At the same time, it called for compassion rather than blame. Libby's life was not lost because of a mistake she made, it was taken by someone who chose to commit violence. That distinction mattered deeply to those who wanted to honor her truth. Today, Libby is remembered not only through court records or news articles, but through the lasting conversations her case inspired. Her name is spoken in discussions about safety, justice, and remembrance. While nothing can undo what happened, her story continues to push society toward awareness and responsibility. In the end, Libby Squire's legacy is one of truth and resilience. Though her life was cut short, her impact endures. Justice was achieved, but more importantly, her story continues to remind the world that every life has value, every voice matters, and no victim should ever be forgotten.